Hey, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of Elden Dogs, your favorite podcast about trying to go fast and dying a lot, at least on my end. And for some people, you can just beat the game in a couple of minutes. At least some computers, possibly. But my name is Brad, also known as Sir Gideon Ofnir, and all of my minions are scouring the lands between. Apparently, there's this Mesmer guy I never heard about, and I'm really upset.
My name is Tyler, or otherwise Alexander Iron Fist, and I don't move very fast. Pots don't move very fast. I die a lot, and I move slowly.
And we have a very special guest today for our speedrunning episode. We're joined by Catalystz. You might know him from fucking destroying Elden Ring multiple times. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, guys. Hello.
Yeah, so on today's episode, we're talking about speedrunning Elden Ring. Some of you listeners might know I'm also on another podcast called Need for Speedrunning, and I've been to Games Done Quick twice. I'm a big fan of speedruns. I love watching them. I've only dabbled briefly myself, and Tyler, you're into it a little bit as well, right?
Yeah, ever since last summer, it was my first GDQ in Minneapolis. That was a ton of fun. I didn't really get into speedrunning before that, but seeing people beat Celeste and a whole bunch of games that I've played, like The Last of Us, and I didn't even think it was going to be possible to speedrun Elden Ring, but I underestimated speedrunners quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a common thing to do.
It's incredible.
And Catalystz, you have a little bit of experience speedrunning, right?
Yeah, on and off since like 2012, so I've been to quite a few events as well. I'm glad that you guys made it out to GDQ. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there last summer, but I was there in 2019 and 2022, and I can only say the same good stuff about it. It's a lot of fun, and it's always super inspiring to see all the different people working on their different games, right? And practicing really hard and just trying to not just beat the records, but try to be the best versions of themselves.
And there's something extra special about speedrunning Souls games, games that are known for being incredibly punishing, incredibly difficult, and it's also disheartening when you die to a boss like Millennia, 50 times or something, and somebody comes in there with a machine gun Serpent's Hunter, and you're like, how do I do this? You've been running Souls, at least Dark Souls and Dark Souls Remastered as well before Elden Ring, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I started with Souls in late 2017, pretty much, and I've been doing it ever since. It's just, like, out of all the games that I've run over the years, this is the series that lasted me the longest, and I still love running them, and I still really enjoy playing those games. So it was I hit a jackpot there in 2017.
Yeah, what is it about Elden Ring specifically? Because you're highly ranked in Dark Souls. I think you're still first place in all achievements in the remastered. And then you don't have a lot of, you don't have runs for 2 or 3 or Bloodborne or Sekiro, really. What is it about Elden Ring that got you back into Souls speedrunning?
Yeah, it's a pretty good question. I mean, it was a very exciting release, Elden Ring, that was, right?
Fucking hype.
So obviously, yeah, like tons of hype, obviously. And so it was going to be very exciting to see how the speedrun was going to develop, because whenever a new game, a popular game releases, right, it doesn't even have to be in the Soul series. Like, for example, Doom 2016 came out, and a lot of people got around that game, and it's super exciting and interesting to see the developments in real time. Be there, like, every morning you wake up and there's, like, 1,500 new messages in the Discord because someone found something. And I think that's kind of why I got into Elden Ring, because I just wanted to be there at the inception, and I've basically been playing it ever since the release and haven't stopped.
Is the Discord kind of where most of the discussion happens between the community? We're kind of not plugged in, so I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, when it comes to speedrunning, pretty much, though I will admit that compared to Souls, whether that's Dark Souls 1, 2, or 3, Elden Ring is a little bit on the quieter side when it comes to speedrunning. Like, the other communities are a little bit more active because there are certain things at the moment in Elden Ring where there's not that much potential to find new skips and stuff, right? Because the game is really, really open. So, but mostly Soul speedrunning, that's the name of the Discord. That's where a lot of the discussion happens, yes.
When you're trying to find a game to speedrun, is there like a eureka moment? Is it when you see a certain movement tech or glitch? What is it that, like, is there something that triggers in your head that makes you like think this is the one I want to do?
So I will say for a lot of people who get into speedrunning, they start with a game that they just really enjoyed. For example, when they were kids, right? So there's a huge nostalgia factor, or just a game that they know they can play again and again and again for a long time. For me personally, it's like a combination of both. I started with Prince of Persia, and it was kind of a moment where I saw a GDQ run, and I was like, damn, like I really enjoyed Prince of Persia: Sands of Time as a younger self, and I saw these tricks being performed, and I was like, dude, I want to try that, right? And that's how I got into it. But then there were speedruns like Mirror's Edge that I picked up just based on seeing how cool the movement tech is. And I didn't have any kind of connection to Mirror's Edge. I just wanted to try the cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm such a huge fan of your videos, your YouTube videos specifically, because a lot of the techniques that are done in speedrunning, they're so fast and they're so hard to comprehend. And to have somebody who's like, all right, let's talk about two-step wrong warps, or like mega warps or whatever, mega zips, two-step mega zips. And if somebody explained that to me, like, just verbally, I'd get confused. I'd be going around in circles. It's your visual ability on those YouTube videos. They're fucking awesome, man.
I really appreciate you saying that. And that's kind of been always the goal, right? Like trying to complement the audio, the explanation with the proper graphics, because I have the ability to create them. So I just kind of figured that's going to be the easiest way for people to comprehend the information. And it seems like I'm doing a decent job. So yeah, thank you very much for the compliment.
No, amazingly well-edited videos. I'm impressed every time I go to YouTube. And like Vati, the way that he has feature film presentation on his stuff, it's beyond me. So Elden Ring speedrunning, now it's mostly common to be on an older version of the game, right?
Well, there were some interesting developments, right? So usually you try to... So when it comes to glitched categories, that's correct, because a lot of the major glitches, like non-foresquid wrong warps, like Pegasus, the flying horse, or the chainsaw glitch or pizza swap, whatever you want to call it, those have all been patched, or at least the easiest version of it. So for those categories, you tend to downpatch, so you have access to those glitches. For any percent glitchless, that is a little bit interesting, because, and all remembrance is glitchless as well, because on the older patches, there were some balancing differences that made the patches faster. Like, for example, Flame of the Redmanes used to deal 40 poise damage per cast. Now it's 10, so it's like so much worse than it used to be. And that was a huge strategy where you would basically poise break a lot of the enemies and then abuse the riposte and abuse charge attacks and stuff like that. But patch 1.10 actually introduced a significant damage buff to riposts. So even though Flame of the Redmanes is a lot worse, it is beneficial to run on current patch for those categories, because you just deal more damage with the riposte. So when you stagger a boss or an enemy and then you riposte after that, the damage is much greater, and that allows you to script certain bosses a little bit quicker and actually results in the faster speedrun as well.
The how often does the path change on these speedruns? Is it quite often? Because I know, like, it used to be the first two shard bearers would involve, at least on one of these runs, it was like going to Rykard, but then it became obsolete. How often does the routing wind up changing?
Yeah, so this is like when the game comes out, right? When a new speedrun is being developed, that changes all the time. Like, I remember when Elden Ring came out and I was routing Sword of Night and Flame for all remembrances. Okay. And basically every single day I had to change my splits completely, because the route would like swap out around, right? Then I would finish a run with that new route, and the next day it would be obsolete again because there would be some new changes. So that is very turbulent. Then it kind of settles. And I want to say that there are usually small incremental changes in strategies, like people figure out small optimizations, but sometimes there's that eureka moment as well. And this is what happened in any percent glitchless, in particular in Elden Ring, where, as you said, first the weapon of choice was Serpent Hunter. So you went to Rykard and as the main like shard bearer, and Radahn as the second. Godric as the second. And then, you go into the mountain tops, finish the game. But then there was an idea that it might be better to just not go to Rykard if there was a good substitute for the Serpent Hunter, which you get there. And that substitute turned out to be the Bloodhound's Fang, and it turned out to be quite a bit faster to kill Radahn and Godric instead.
Damn. Yeah, plotting a path, it's almost like when they patch the game, it's like the defense is switching up on you, so you have to like change your offense.
Yeah, that's a huge moment when you get like that list of, oh fuck, Hoarfrost Stomp is done, which used to be a crutch for a lot of people. And Sword of Night and Flame was probably the only way I beat it my first try. I was just leaning on that thing, and it's good to balance it. It's weird. Some games, I think it was like Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild, like some of the patches just wind up killing a lot of speedrun tech, and that's a bummer. But luckily, you can go online and like, downgrade your version or whatever, which is a cool thing. But then you have to constantly be offline when you play it, right?
Of course, yeah.
So with speedrunning, the regular game has a lot of like regular completion requirements. This is one of the things you kind of start with in a lot of your videos. You're supposed to get 2 shard bearers, and you have to go to the round table hold at least once to unlock the Lane Dell. Then you need to slay Morgott in the capital. You need to rest at the Forge of the Giants and defeat Malekith, unlock the Rune of Death, and then Elden Beast, roughly. There's a lot of like other little steps in between there, but essentially that's kind of like the path that you're going to have to do for a lot of the speed runs, unless you're doing any percent, fuck off, I'm going to ride my horse wherever I want. Some of the basics for speedrunning, for those that don't know. There's a lot of saving and quitting in speedruns, and that's to partially like stagger where enemies are, kind of reset things, right?
So there are a couple of reasons for that, actually. One of them is exactly what you point out. When you save and quit out of the game and return back, the enemies, basically in every FromSoft game, except for it works slightly differently in Dark Souls 2 and in Sekiro, but they get ported back to their default position, right, where they normally spawn. So that allows you to basically de-aggro enemies, get out of combat, and stuff like that. And another reason that save and quit is usually used is because for speedruns, we use the in-game time, and the in-game time doesn't tick during the loading screens or when you're in the main menu. And so it turns out that certain animations can be skipped, like opening a certain door. You can start opening it, you quit out of the game, and when you load back in, the door is already opened, but you didn't waste time, in-game time, watching that animation unfold. It's a little bit of a double-edged blade, right? Because I feel like not everybody wants to like watch load screens, and when everybody can also save the time the same way, it would sort of make sense to just disallow those quit outs so that people don't do them, and then you have a level playing field because you're basically only saving time over the game, not other players.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that would be extremely arbitrary. Like, do you ban quit outs on doors, levers? Do you specify like each object? It would just be pretty complicated. So allowing everything is the simplest solution.
Plus having that aggro on some, like when you have to go get the key to get into the academy behind that dragon, if you couldn't de-aggro that dragon, that fight would add a lot of time if you couldn't get away.
Absolutely.
One spot that I really noticed was in Farm Azula when that first ancient dragon comes in and it's flying down ready to get you, and you're like, well, we'll just go back a little bit, we'll start over, timeout, do over. And it's like you mentioned with animation canceling, it's like so many ultra minor optimizations. It's about saving a fraction of a second as many times as possible, because, I mean, for those that haven't watched an Elden Ring speedrun, it's madness. It's unlike the game that you're used to playing. Go watch it if you haven't. I know that they're doing blindfolded Elden Ring speedruns now, which that hurts me.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine how you could. Like, I need both of my eyes and a lot of caffeine and a good mental state just to beat any of the bosses on any number of tries. I couldn't do it blindfolded.
And when it comes down to those minor optimizations, there's a thing called movement tech in speedrunning. I don't know who the audience is listening necessarily. Movement tech, essentially, it's like in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, he's going to backdash the whole time because backdashing is just a little bit faster than straight running there. And with Elden Ring, there's a few different the basic movement tech, there is the bow cancel for when you're jumping and landing, right? So like you jump in the air and then you pull the bow out and it cancels your landing animation.
Has that been...
That's exactly right.
Has that been patched out, or is that still in the current version of the game?
Yeah, that is still in the current version of the game, and it works exactly like you described. The only tricky part is that it basically, for every single jump, the timing is going to be slightly different, right? So you cannot just time it off of when you jump, because there's going to be a difference between where you're jumping from and where you're landing. So the fall is going to last a different amount of time. So basically, for every specific jump in the speedrun that you want to cancel, you have to practice the timing for that jump individually.
That is the one thing from your videos that I learned that I've actually tried to do in my recent playthrough of Elden Ring, because I'm doing a brand new playthrough getting ready for Shadow of the Erd Tree, and I tried to do the bow cancel with my new samurai character I'm playing, and I did not succeed. So I mean, I haven't practiced very much, so I didn't know if it got patched out or not.
You'll get it. It's one of those things, though. It's probably difficult when you start, but after you get it and you keep doing it, eventually that muscle memory just kicks in. It's like watching people do. When you're pulling out the pizza swap, it seems like an ultra specific set of inputs you're doing, but you're just getting it first try, just from that muscle memory now.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. Except, pizza swap is infinitely more complicated than bow cancels, yeah. But it takes a lot of practice, but in the end, it's like, I don't know, playing a fighting game and learning a combo, right? It's a very similar principle, I think.
Except you're doing the hardest fatality every single pizza swap or something like that. And another term you'll use often when you're talking to speedrunners is frame perfect. And there's a lot of you have a certain amount of frames to do those tricks. Another basic movement tech is just jumping in general. Jumping uphill is faster than sprinting, but only if the angle of the uphill is right, because the upward animation is quicker and the downward animation is slower. So if you're going up, you get more of the faster up and less of the slower down. I think that's right.
That tracks. I'm following.
Yeah.
You see,
someone's been doing their homework. Yeah, exactly.
It's easy when you just have a teacher who explains it to the degree that even I can understand. And then often you start with a samurai. Samurai is generally who you want to start with, unless you're doing some weird task stuff, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because samurai for speedrunning, and even in general for casual, it's a really, really good class. It starts with the bow, so you can do the bow cancels basically. So you've got the small optimization there. If you ever need to parry, you have a small parry shield that you start with immediately, and you have an Uchigatana, right, which is a bleed weapon right from the start, and unsheath is unarguably a very strong Ash of War. So before you get your first weapon of choice, you can use that one. For example, in any percent glitchless, they kill the Bloodhound Knight Daravel for the BHF with the Uchi, and it works really, really well. With the Serpent Hunter routes, you used to kill Gotsuke Noble with that, and in Volcano Manor. And obviously that's a very tanky boss to go against with a Uchi +2, but thanks to the bleed and thanks to Unsheath, you can pretty much script it with Sleep Pots. So yeah, it's a really good starting class overall.
And with those old runs that were Serpent Hunter, that was not even using the pizza swap, right? That was just using the Serpent Hunter without that extra technique.
That's correct, yeah.
And so besides those two basic movement techs we mentioned, there's something about holding the block button when you're running makes you run faster, right?
Yeah, so this goes with the jumping that you mentioned, where repeatedly jumping is faster on flat ground and uphill. If you were to just spam jump, then you would get basically a small cooldown, like a fatigue jump, right, where your character just hops slightly. So if you hold the block between those, even for just one frame, usually obviously it's a little bit longer than that because we're not machines, but it allows you to bypass that cooldown, so you avoid that fatigue jump and you can keep on jumping repeatedly. Another thing actually with blocking though is a small thing that you might be able to cancel certain animations a little bit sooner if you hold block. So for example, if you attack and then hold block after that, there's maybe 3 frames that you're kind of cut off from the attack animation. And that is not super useful in speedruns, but for example in PvP, that is a huge thing.
And there also used to be when you were falling, if you use the attack in the air, did that reset the death timer for the falling, or is that just like allows you to? It doesn't, because it's 12 seconds of free fall. Anything dies, and is that the only thing it stops, or would it stop fall damage if you were falling and use the attack in the air?
Yeah, so there are two things that it does. First, it resets this timer that you mentioned, right? So it starts ticking from 0 again. And the second thing is, if you're in combat and you land from like not even like a super big height, the landing animation drains a lot of your stamina. However, what you can do is you can attack midair. The game consumes the stamina for that midair attack, but when you land on the ground, you don't get the stagger animation. Like, you still get stuck, right? You don't save any time, but your stamina is not depleted when you land on the ground. So that way you can keep a bit more stamina than if you just didn't attack midair.
And that seems something super valuable to not speedrunners too. I mean, some of this tech is relevant to anyone playing the game. Way to get around faster.
Yeah, like, did you mention that crouching will help your stamina regenerate faster? Or is it blocking?
So that was a tech as well in the game, but that got patched a couple months ago, where basically you were able to keep on sprinting and just crouching and uncrouching really fast allowed you to basically keep almost the sprint speed, but it regenerated a bunch of your stamina, right? So that was like a really quick way to regenerate stamina in combat. That has been patched since.
Well, that makes sense, because I also tried that one and it wasn't working for me. So that was my next question, if that got patched out.
Just like kind of a little category overview. I mean, we mentioned some of them. There's any percent, that is get those credits running any way you can. There's then any percent unrestricted, which is kind of a specific category, because that just zips and wrong warps. They are allowed, but other glitches aren't. What's any percent unrestricted?
Yeah, so basically when Elden Ring came out, the categories were, as the game develops in its infancy, it becomes pretty difficult to standardize the rules, and there was a little bit of a mess with the categories, but essentially, any percent allows you to abuse glitches that are not dependent on the hardware, right? So zips can potentially depend on your hardware. If you cannot reach certain stability of your frame rate, it will become very inconsistent. And so that's why they ended up being relegated to their own category. So you have any percent that bans zips, and then you have any percent unrestricted that allows zips to be used.
Okay. And then there's any percent no wrong warp, which wrong warp and Pegasus glitches are banned, which is a shame.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about, that like the categories were a bit of a mess. So before we got any percent glitchless to exist, before we managed to settle on the specific rule set, right? Because you need to, the community needs to decide, like, what do they count as a glitch, what should be in the spirit of the category, what shouldn't. Some people were complaining that they don't want to do Pegasus and wrong warps, and so that's why any percent no wrong warp ended up being created. And now at this point, I would say very much it is a little bit of an obsolete category, and in my opinion, it should probably be archived because no one really runs it anyways. But for now, it exists on the leaderboards.
It's super cool the way that the community kind of gets together to make these rules too, because I know in the BioShock Infinite run, about like a quarter of the way through the game, there's an item that might drop with a 10% drop rate, which is contingent on everything else in your speedrun being valuable. And the community came together like, all right, there will be this one mod that guarantees you get this one time. And everyone just kind of agreed to it. And it's nice that the community, I'm sure there's some argument online, but at least it's like a kind of people coming together and making a decision.
Yeah. And I think for something like that too, where your entire run depends on a 10% drop, eliminating that little bit of luck and just having the speed run rely on skill, because now you're guaranteed to get that, makes for a more competitive scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem with BioShock was also that it's a drop that you can try to get again, right? You can quick save and quick load. So if someone gets really, really lucky, they might end up with a time that's like near unbeatable without incredible luck. There's farming in Souls games, for example, where you're relying on a Black Knight weapon to drop, but then that's a binary. Like, you either get the weapon and you can continue the run, and it's at the start as well, or you don't get the weapon and you reset and you try again. There's no advantage to being extremely lucky, essentially.
Yeah, kind of one of the big ones that I remember from when I started watching speedruns was Mario Brothers 3. When you get to that final world and the hands might grab you, and you might have to do like an extra 1 to 2 to 3 levels, and that's just RNG making a big effect on your entire run. What's some of the biggest RNG moments in Elden Ring when you're playing?
That's a really good question. That's obviously going to depend on the category, because the category ends up determining how the fights are going to look.
Yeah.
And for example, when you can use the pizza swap, the fights generally do not really have much RNG. It's a very consistent category. But something like any percent glitchless, there are going to be fights like Radahn. There's going to be fights like Morgoth, where if you end up getting the patterns that are most favorable, you can save 10, 15 seconds compared to someone who ends up not getting the attack that is the most optimal. So generally in Elden Ring, it's usually RNG within the fights. There isn't really any farming of weapons. There isn't really any rare drops of materials, nothing like that.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly you guys can identify those RNG moments too in some of those boss fights. Like Godric moves his pinky toe and you're like, this is not good. This is not what we wanted to start. I'm like, he hasn't even moved yet.
And he's got 20 pinky toes and you're watching all of them.
Yeah. That's crazy that you can notice the pattern that quickly.
Well, and you can look under the hood too, right? The community is able to specifically see all that's happening inside of the game's engine and know like what specifically is happening in the game, because that's something as a console player, that's a tool that like I can't utilize, but you can see the game just getting like broken open, and you can see what the drop rates are at. You watch, Sekiro Doobie or Zuli the Witch, and they're just showing, oh, this was 2 years ago, cut from the game. The dialogue is still in there. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The modding community definitely deserves a shout out, because they've been working on FromSoft games for years now, and they've been slowly but surely reverse engineering most of them. And for example, now we do not necessarily have access to like all the code, but it is possible to read the AI scripts, right? So you can see, for example, a specific attack that a boss has, and you can see which chances are depending on like what is the chance of him doing the attack, depending on the distance. So then these are things that are basically like impossible to test in practice, because you don't realize that. But then if you look at the code, you see that, okay, if you're not 5 yards next to the boss, if you're 15, it's like 20% chance higher that he's going to do that specific attack that you're looking for. So then you try to stay within that distance, which is something that without the modders, we wouldn't know at all.
Yeah, that makes me think of the Radahn fight. It blew my mind when I saw that if you just run away from Radahn, it skips this whole first shooting the arrows at you. And it made me upset. I was like, damn it, why didn't I know this? Some other categories, All Remembrances. That's one of my favorite ones to watch. That's just like a good, nice bite-sized chunk of the game, and it's fun, it's engaging, and you get to see a lot of stuff. All Achievements, which is surprisingly not that much longer. It's not too long of a run for... That's a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah.
And we mentioned glitchless. There's a lot of disallowed techniques in there. I didn't see a lot of death cam stuff in the videos I watched of yours. I saw some of it, but it mentioned the death cam to deload assets is not allowed in glitchless.
That's correct.
Yeah, what are some of the instances where you would use that?
Well, that's a pretty tricky question. There, for example, is a skip for the... Well, I don't think you would use it in a speedrun, but there's a skip for the Red Wolf in the Academy that uses a death cam, where you abuse the fact that you can just run through the fog wall if you activate the death cam before it's loaded.
Okay.
Because for those listeners that don't know what the death cam does, it essentially prevents the game from loading or deloading assets, because the game's expecting you to die. It's the camera, the top-down view that you get when you're falling off a platform, for example. And if you manage to activate it without dying, then you can abuse that property. And so then you can run through the Red Wolf, and it's not super useful because the Red Wolf is a pretty quick fight. He's quite squishy, but that might be one potential place. But that's the thing with Elden Ring, right? In the other Souls games or in the other FromSoft games, death camps have a lot more use because the games are a little bit more closed off. The only places where like death camps could be potentially useful is legacy dungeons in Elden Ring, right? And even those, there just aren't that many places where you would have to skip something or open something big. So the potential to use death camps is a lot lower simply based on the fact that there just isn't that much stuff to actually skip.
It's super interesting that so many FromSoft games have like shared glitches and breaks, like that so much of the building blocks are the same, because I remember watching a Dark Souls speedrun and there's like a huge death cam section where you can't really see your character. There's a weird angle and you're running around through this huge location. It's just interesting that they're like wrong warps are just like, all right, we can do it in this game too. It's weird that they have so much shared DNA.
Yeah, they've been using the same proprietary engine that they've been editing since, well, at least Demon Souls, but honestly it goes even like further beyond that, right? So we're talking into like the late 2000s where they started with this engine that is carrying them all the way to Elden Ring and maybe even beyond. Like, I don't know what they're working on right now, but they've been iterating upon it, and that's why there are these shared commonalities. But it also leads to some of the scuffed interactions where, so, for example, input drops after certain actions have been happening for several games now, and they haven't been fixed because they just keep on like adding a layer upon layer into the code, and some of the underlying problems are very difficult to solve right now.
So I kind of just made a few notes on a few of the runs of that you did commentaries for. The first one I wanted to look at was any percent glitchless. This was by Blanks. This is 56 minutes and 27 seconds. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to go over beat by beat, but some of the highlights here. Torrent is pretty important in a lot of speedruns. It just makes me have Skyrim flashbacks of riding horses up mountains a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm surprised at how much geometry Torrent can really take advantage of. It's tricky platforming. It's fucking Mario Brothers to the 10th degree. But you can like skip Celia and not have to run around and get all the, like, activate all those little spots before you can fight in there. That seems like a point where I've seen some speedruns crash too.
The tree jump?
Just the climbing.
Yeah. With
Torrent. Does Elden Ring crash a lot when you speedrun?
It used to on the older patches. The stability got quite a bit better on the newer ones, but it can still crash here and there. The good thing about using in-game time is that usually it like the save file goes back a little bit, right? There's a bit of a rollback, but the in-game time rolls back with it. So if the game crashes, most of the time it doesn't mean that the speedrun is dead, and you can just kind of keep on going. Yeah,
essentially, if you're not going to be wrong warping or zipping around, you're going to want to get Torrent kind of as like your first stop in the speed run. You want to go get Torrent.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting, too. Before you go fight a lot of bosses, one of the first steps after that is you want to get a good weapon. You want to go get the Bloodhound's Fang or Serpent Hunter, and then you want to power it up, and then you go back. A lot of it's just kind of grabbing graces and kind of getting further, and then you'll like go back and do a cleanup run. Is the Draconic Tree Sentinel outside of Lane Dell, can you still cheese him like that, where you learn to the edge? That's still a thing?
That is still a thing, yes.
So how does that work? You aggro him, you go to a certain edge, and he comes over, and then you can kind of just bump him off?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You basically aggro the boss. This is the thing with the open field bosses in Elden Ring, right? You can usually aggro them from pretty far, and they'll keep being aggroed for quite a while as well. It depends on the boss, of course, but for DTS it works out perfectly, where you bring him close to the edge, then you parry him, which puts him in like a groggy state, and when you hit him in that groggy state, he stumbles. And if you do it correctly, if you angle it correctly, you can just make him stumble off the edge, and he falls through a kill plane.
Yeah, that Radon used to be able to do that as well, right? You used to get him to like the shore. Is that still in the game?
No, that was patched like quite early after release, yeah.
Yeah, Radon went through a lot of patches. I remember Radon was fucking super hard when the game started, and then they like brought him way down.
Yeah, there was conversations that I was in, like, oh, yeah, so you're past Radon. Did you do it pre or post patch? And it was like a badge of honor until they balanced him out.
Yeah.
Like,
You also have to sell your soul a little bit in speedrunning. The any percent glitchless involved killing Alexander.
that's sad.
Well, it's not our fault that he has such a good talisman, you know.
It's actually his fault. It's your fault. And yeah, there's also a lot of platforming in Lane Dell that I kind of wanted to call out. I'm a simple man. When I'm watching a speed run, if I see, this goes back to Halo 2 back in the day, where anytime you can fuck with geometry and jump to somewhere where you're not supposed to, when you can skip that whole perfumer section and kind of just jump down the side of Lane Dell, that's very exciting to me. So you have to do a delayed jump. So first you get off the geometry just a little bit and then start your jump. And if you attack midair, you can strafe toward the wall. And then you hit some geometry. It's also cool that they like have geometry there that you can interact with, even though no one should be there. But that way you can like stop your fall damage from killing you. It's amazing how much you can skip. And plus, there's another spot in Lane Dell, which is really cool. When you get to the broken bridge later on, rather than having to climb up the big dragon, you can do that same thing, platforming across the broken bridge. You ride the side. You have to jump around it. Elden Ring has got a lot of platforming, which I find very exciting.
Is the broken bridge the part with the invisible railing? Is that what I'm thinking of?
No, are you thinking the mountaintops?
I might be thinking mountaintops.
No, this is down there where they have the lion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Essentially, though, any boss that has multiple phases, fuck that. We're not going to let bosses have phases in speedrunning. And a lot of that is, partially having the right weapon set up, the right bleed, and then also managing when animations are like going to happen, right? Like before they have a chance to start this animation to lead them into the phase, you just fuck them up too much. If I'm understanding right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are points of bosses where basically past a certain HP threshold, they're gonna perform a specific action, and then if that is something that is determined, then you can most likely find a way around it to exploit it, and that's what you use in some of the boss fights. And for example, on Maliketh, multi-phase boss fights, what you can do is you can build up poise on Beast Clergyman in phase 1, and then the poise damage that you've dealt, right? It carries over to the start of phase 2 as well, so you can stagger him much earlier and then finish the fight basically in a scripted manner without having to deal with any of the RNG in second phase.
That's so crazy to me that the poise carries over. Same thing with the fire giant, right? Like you specifically pick up one throwing knife just because you built up the poise enough before phase 2 starts, and then you're so far away you have to throw one of the kukri at him just to maintain the poise damage. It's so much just like fine tuning and like perfect management of all those little things. That one was really exciting to me, that fire giant one. And anytime someone goes to the Godskin duo and just handles it, So everybody knows the Godskin duo. If you don't know that they're very susceptible to sleep, put them to sleep, play a little music for them. But one thing that I learned watching your run is it's possible to continue damaging enemies in their like death animation after their health bar is gone, but the Godskin duo share a health bar. So after you defeat one of them, while he's still like dying, you can just still kind of beat the shit out of him while the other guy's asleep. That blew my mind.
Yeah, it's the same concept on Four Kings in Dark Souls 1. So it's another thing where FromSoft are basically using a technique that they've done, over a decade ago at this point. So it was kind of an obvious thing to try when the game came out. But essentially, it works it's even more interesting because there's another Godskin that's under the map, and that's the one that has the main health bar, and that's the damage that's the entity that you are damaging through the other minions. seconds, essentially, right? So that's how it works. Yeah, you can hit them when the individual Godskin is already dead, and you can damage the cumulative health bar. And if you do it correctly, you can kill them in just 2 of them, right? In an actual duo, in one cycle, as we call it.
I have been very on the record that the Godskin duo is probably my least favorite fight in the game. I hate those 2 guys. And so every speed run, watching them just get their asses kicked is just, it's so nice.
There's just such a big toolbox in this game too, where, I feel like there's still many optimizations that need to be discovered. Because even, Pizza Swap wasn't found, what was that, like maybe a year after the game was already out that people discovered Pizza Swap?
Yeah, it wasn't a full year, but it was definitely a couple of months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I want to say 7-8 months, which, I mean, for a game as big as Elden Ring with as many players, right? That's a long time for such a major discovery, yeah.
Do you think a lot of these runs, these world records, there's more optimizations to be had, or is it pretty fine-tuned?
No, I would say, so for example, it again depends. I think the All Remembrances record that I hold for now, I think that's in a pretty good spot, but there are still places to be improved. There's a skip that I, for example, didn't go for because it's like insane, but if somehow managed to hit that, it would save like, I don't know, quite a bit of time, like 20 seconds, which in a run that is, 61 minutes or so, that's a lot of time.
Massive.
So there's definitely room for improvement in execution with currently known strategies. But of course, I'm fairly certain that there's also room for improvement of the existing strategies by discovering something new.
And also in Farm Azula, I was very excited when there's another big platforming section where you're able to go up that elevator and jump over on part of the building to like skip that massive section with those horrible birds. And I don't know, all of that stuff is just, I get very excited. It blows my mind because I find some things, I like to fuck with the geometry. There's a few spots where I think that I just naturally like to sequence break things with Torrent. I found that one in the mountaintops where you were able to jump up that side by that one cave to like, you call it like Route C. There's like 2 different ways, but then there's the other one. And there's another one that I found in Liurnia of the Lakes, which I'll hit my head on something for a while to find that, but those little platforming routes are always exciting for me.
Yeah, like you said, Skyrim kind of trained us for that. Like, I'm not walking around this fucking mountain. I can get up it. I can get up it with a horse.
Yeah, it's very exciting what just introducing a dedicated jump button does, right? Compared to Souls. There's a lot more freedom of movement in Elden Ring.
And then you go to a game like Bloodborne, which doesn't have a jump button, but pretends it kind of has like a dash, like a little dodge jump button. That game is just frustrating to me.
Yeah.
Obsessed, though. Obsessed.
Liza P is the same way. It's got like it's a 2-button sequence to jump. And some of the platforming I just miss because we don't have a dedicated jump button.
Yeah. So you do a video on the Any Percent Unrestricted Task Run by Verazi. And tool-assisted speedruns, if anyone's listening and they haven't watched them, do yourself a favor, go watch a few. That shit's the craziest kind of speed run. It's also possibly the hardest to understand. Essentially, all the button inputs can be planned ahead of time. So Mario will run at the exact frame. He will jump at the exact frame. He will hit the right spots of every block, every enemy, at just the exact pixel. And people are able to make a perfect run. It's a little different, though. I haven't heard somebody explain the way that, modern games work as well as you. I talked with Dwango AC one time, and, he was talking about how disc speedrunning is so much different because of load times, and you can quickly fall out of sync because games load differently. And if you are a frame off, it falls apart very quickly. So the way that the Elden Ring task run works, it staggers at like saving and quitting at like certain moments, right? Like they'll do a section and then save it, and then it's isolated, and then they just kind of do segments, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly correct. You essentially have only a limited amount of time before this desync that you mentioned happens with the scripted inputs and how the game progresses. Like any kind of frame rate deviation is essentially gonna cause you to start lagging off with the inputs, and so that's why when you quit out and you reset the game and then you start a new segment, you basically begin anew and you reset that time before the lag catches up again, and that's exactly how that task speedrun for Elden Ring was completed.
Yeah, luckily the task speedrun, it only is a couple minutes, right? What is it, like 2 minutes and 30 seconds? I forget what it is.
Yeah, it's just under 4, yeah. But
just under 4 minutes. It is so fast. And thank you so much for making a 30-minute video about a 4-minute run so I can understand what the fuck is happening. You start the game, Verazi, at least the task starts the game, and you choose a vagabond. The heavy load is important because heavy load zips longer and further than medium loads. Okay, now zipping, I'm going to try and say how it works, and then you can tell me if I'm close. So zipping is where they overlap the animations for slow walk with idle block, and the velocity calculations just kind of go haywire. The animations, they overlap kind of like a Venn diagram a little bit, and it's somehow staggering the velocity calculations, and it just, all of physics is out the window. Ish.
Yeah, you pretty much got that spot on, I would say. Like, without, any visual aids, I think that's as succinct as you can put it, essentially.
Because that run starts off in the Chapel of Anticipation. There's like 2 little steps, and then they fly up to the 2nd floor. And the zipping, people do that, though. Like, there's a whole bunch of human speedrunners that do zipping as well. It's fairly frame perfect, right? Like, what does it come to? Down to like 10 frames or something like that for a zip?
Yeah, I mean, it is for a zip. It is actually frame perfect. Now, if you're doing specifically double zips, for example, or 2-step zips, that becomes even more than frame perfect, right? Because you have to hit several inputs in frame perfect manners. But yeah, it is very much frame perfect.
What does the accuracy look like on a zip? Because a lot of speedrunners that I've seen do it, they've practiced it, and they hit their mark, the majority of the time. But is there any calculation that you're doing to make sure you're going far enough? Like Brad mentioned, the heavy load is really, really important for that run because you're going to travel further in your zip. Mm-hmm. But what does your accuracy look like when you're doing it? If you...
How
is it the same amount of distance every time, or can you end up, overshooting or undershooting?
No, you can definitely end up overshooting, undershooting, but that has less to do with the inputs themselves, because those will be consistent. If you hit the zip on the first, basically, cycle of the idle animation, like, you're going to get the same distance, right? But there are zips that utilize the geometry, like going uphill, for example, or bouncing off a rock, stuff like that. And if then your aim is a little bit off, then you might end up just flying somewhere else, yeah. The accuracy itself... It depends, right? Like, the more you practice, the better you get, but it is so precise that you will end up missing because it's just, like, the precision, it's impossible to control it perfectly as a human.
So it's more about your placement when you start the zip and the direction you're facing than the inputs.
Just kind of hoping for, like, a rough area.
Yeah.
For those listening, this might sound very foreign. I'll have the videos linked in the description. Definitely check them out. But imagine you step out of the Chapel of Anticipation, and then all of a sudden you're above Stormvale and you're falling. And one thing that's cool with zips is the way it locks in your, like, the up and down axis. So you can fall a massive distance when you land, but it's going by the axis where you started is how it works, right? So you won't have any fall damage.
Yeah, and for people who have never seen a zip, you've probably seen one and don't know it, or at least a variation of it or something. But in Grand Theft Auto 5, there's the gate catapult. That when you got in the car and you drove up to the gate, it would just launch you.
Oh, really?
People discovered that, and it was on Instagram and Facebook back in the day. So if you've seen that video, that's a lot of what a zip looks like.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, too, because when you... I'm friends with Covert Muffin, and he loves talking about the science of speedrunning and what it really is just understanding specifically how the game works, how the weapons work, how the enemy's AI works. And one thing I love about watching the zips, because, task runs can be hard to like take a lot out of sometimes. They're so fast and so weird, but I love seeing the way assets are loaded in or not loaded in. So, you land in Stormvale and that shit is not done. Like that is a frozen pizza still. And you land there, and then what you wind up doing is a wrong warp, a force quit wrong warp. Now, this is beyond my pay grade. So there's like a little bit of a 5-frame delay with spawn points. So if you get into, like, let's say Liurnia, and you force quit out, it doesn't save your spawn point, so it goes to the default spawn point. Is that how it works?
Essentially, yeah. So think about it this way, right? You're in Area A, and Area B is Liurnia. You enter Liurnia after warping to it, for example, right? The game is gonna need 5 frames, so your character has to be 5 frames in that new area for the game to store the coordinates. Right? So the game knows that the last area you were in is Liurnia, but it doesn't know the exact coordinates. Because what you do is you Alt F4, like at the end of the loading screen, so you interrupt that 5-frame process. And then when you load back into the game knows that it should put you to Liurnia, but it doesn't have the coordinates for where to actually put you. So it just puts you to the first spawn point on the internal list of the game, that the so-called default location.
And that's super useful. And where those default locations can make a big difference. Like with Farm Azula, that became a critical skip, because when you go to the 4 belfries and it just shoots you over to Farm Azula, you're able to do a force quit wrong warp there, right, to get to the other spot in Farum. And that's also how you do Nokron, I want to say, right, because you also go down and
Exactly. Yeah. It's very convenient that the first spawn point on the list ends up being in like a valid part of the area, and not somewhere out of bounds.
And we'll talk about Giza's wheel and defaults here in a second. And then there's like the Malekith kill in the task is super interesting, because I'm gonna try and talk about this. The boss you have to get close enough for Malekith to be loaded in. And our good boy's sitting there, Malekith's hanging out. And then you need to mega zip, which is another kind of zip. And this takes you so far away that all of the map deloads, but Malekith doesn't. So he's like a Wile E. Coyote. Just all of a sudden there's no ground beneath him and he's falling. And the trick is, you're falling too, because you're 12 miles over the ocean, but you're able to do the attack, which resets your animations, and you just gotta not die before Malekith, essentially. I think that's kind of how that works.
Yeah, it's spot on. Absolutely, yes.
It's cool too, because another thing that happens with Elden Beast, where you get close enough to load the Elden Beast, and the Elden Beast is loaded in when you're by Horalu, right? Like if you're close enough to that, Elden Beast is actually way below Lane-Del. That whole platform is underneath there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You ever watch those boundary break videos on YouTube?
I've seen a few, yeah.
Yeah, the Elden Ring one blew my mind, but you're way more familiar with that than me. But yeah, so Elden Beast, he's down there, and meanwhile, you got Horalu just like fucking raging all professional wrestler on you, and Elden Beast is falling that whole time. So you just have to survive just long enough with Horalu to have the Elden Beast fall. So you don't even go in there and see Radagon before Elden Beast dies. It's fucking wild. The non-task run of what is that? Any percent unrestricted. The non-task run is 3 minutes and 56 seconds. So that's very crazy.
On my PlayStation 4, it took longer to load Elden Ring than it did to complete that run.
You poor bastard.
Yeah.
And just wanted to briefly talk about your world record with all remembrances. 1 hour, 1 minute, and 14 seconds. Again, this is the 15 remembrances. This is with a samurai. One of the first notes I made was about the gatefront grace. If you activate the grace at a 45-degree angle, it takes a while for your character to turn around to start like the scene, and you're able to fast travel through the menu before your character can turn around. So Melena's really trying to hang out with you, and you are just fucking gone. Such like a great minor optimization. I love that. And the Pegasus glitch. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Pegasus?
Yeah, absolutely. So Pegasus is very interesting because again it abuses a certain way the games in the Souls series have been made, right? When anything goes through a kill plane, it's expected to basically die, right? Because its HP is reduced to 0. So then the game also automatically disables the gravity on that entity. Same thing happens with the player, same thing happens with enemies, but it also happens with Torrent. However, the thing is that Torrent can be respawned because you can just use one of your flask charges and then, get the poor guy back. So Pegasus essentially, the main goal of that glitch is to try and get Torrent to fall through one of these kill planes and then respawn him. And when you do, his gravity is disabled and you can fly. The most convenient way to throw him off a platform is basically jumping off Torrent and then quitting out before the game registers Torrent being desummoned, but after it registers you jumping off. And when you do that correctly, when you load back into the game, Torrent is basically just going to be standing next to your character. Then you perform another save and quit close to the edge of a platform next to a kill plane, and when you load back in, Torrent just happily falls through it, and then you basically can just enjoy Air Pegasus.
Air Pegasus, little gravity-free Torrent. And what takes that zero gravity aspect of him away? What will cause him to lose that?
Going through a loading screen, that's the main thing, right? So if you want to return everything back to normal, you just quit out again and load back in.
So this is one of my favorite things I saw while like watching all your videos. Just the fact that Torrent is, you can just, go over the water. You can go up to the mountaintops, and anytime that you can really just fuck around with geometry that you're not supposed to be able to access, I get so excited about. And it's tough to go down, right? Like if you go, you hit anything that kind of goes up, you kind of just weasel your way up on top of things. But going down with Torrent isn't as easy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's crucial to be able to do it because the only way that your game is going to store your position after you fly is that you need to hit stable ground somewhere, right? So you need to get back on normal flat ground. However, if you gain too much height, it might be impossible to lose that height again and land somewhere in bounds to be able to reset Torrent back to normal. So that's why it is crucial to find places where you can like get your head or Torrent's head stuck underneath something and then use that to lose a bunch of height.
Yeah. So many highlights of the Pegasus glitch. It's just so fun going around Stormvale and just using a different entrance. One of the coolest ones is in Liurnia to get down to Estelle. Because we don't want to go through the Lake of Rot. We don't want to fucking ever go there.
No.
And you're able to get into the elevator from around like the backside and then ride the elevator down. That's just wild.
Yeah, that's just abusing the awesome map design that FromSoft are known for, right? Connecting their areas very diligently, allowing you to see the area that you've been to or that you're gonna approach ahead of time. And thanks to that, it is possible to just use Pegasus around the Moonlight Altar, and Lake of Rot is right underneath that. So you touch the elevator shaft, as you said, and then from there you can wrong warp within the area, and it puts you back into like valid ground, back in bounds, and you can fight Estelle. Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Very cool. I like too in regular Lucaria, you can go by like the water wheel, and you're able to just kind of sneak up around the backside, and it's interesting just seeing the way that the maps and everything's loaded in and the way you can interact with areas that you're not anywhere near. It's always fascinating to me. There's one glitch, though, that is the coolest glitch in all of Elden Ring. And I didn't know about this until I watched your video. because when I'm playing a game, I kind of avoid watching the speedrun until I've beaten it. And so I hadn't watched a lot of Elden Ring, and then I kind of just missed it for a while. But the pizza swap, my God. So the pizza swap, it involves making the Serpent's Hunter into a machine gun.
Essentially, yeah.
It's so crazy.
I don't understand how it works, but it is so pleasing to watch how quickly it'll just melt bosses.
Catalystz, would you prefer me to try and explain it, or do you just want to handle it yourself?
I mean, if you're down to the task, I'd like to listen for sure.
Okay, we'll see. So when using a stance on a weapon under normal circumstances that is not supposed to have a stance. This is how you can use a stance on a weapon that's not supposed to have one. It's achieved by activating the stance on a regular weapon, in this case, the Uchi-Katana. It's followed that by pivoting away from the enemy and then locking onto it during the pivot. And then with extreme precision, you swap the Uchi-Katana for the Serpent's Hunter during the pivot and the lock-on. The Serpent's Hunter has no information about having a stance attack. So the game defaults to the first one on the internal list. And sweet baby Jesus, it's Giza's wheel. So it's just held forward like Giza's wheel, which, you hold it forward and just...
Yep.
And that's what the Serpent's Hunter turns into. And the damage and hitbox properties are drawn from the L2 attack. And it's from the L2 attack of the special variation in Rykard's Arena, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Because what happens then, once the stance is activated like that, the game also takes the default state of the weapon that you're wielding. And for the Serpent Hunter, the default state is the one in Rykard's Arena, so it gets the extended hitbox and everything.
And that's insane, because after you killed Rykard, you go, is it Godric then? Is the next boss that you got to melt?
Yeah.
And seeing, like, in your run, how far away you can be when you attack him because of the hitbox is a game changer. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and you sound on one of your videos almost a little torn about how effective the glitch is. Like, it just changes everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is one of those glitches that completely define the speedrun, right? That's why there is a glitchless category and why there is a glitchful category, because not everyone wants to keep on using the same glitch again and again and again. It can become quite boring over time. So that's why I was kind of torn about it. But I'm glad it exists, because it's just such a fascinating interaction. There are so many little key individual pieces that have to be in the codes for it to work like the way it does. And it's wonderful that it does.
Just comes together perfectly. To me, this is one of those eureka moments. It's a moment that people are going to cheer when they see it the first time, and it's super easy to look at. Some games, their glitches are difficult and impressive, and they're not pleasing to watch. So many speedruns. Anytime I see Donkey Kong Country 2 when they're wrong warping to the different bosses or anything, I'm like, it's cool, but it's not pleasing to watch. Whereas this, anytime you pull out the Serpent's Hunter ranged weapon machine gun variation, it's exciting, man. And you watch these bosses. Horaloo he's scary. He's really doing his all. And he's charging at you, and then he just...
and then he's just done.
And yeah, I mean, you don't often get to see bosses get hit that hard, that fast. It's insane. Oh, Millennia, it's really cute. You're doing great. Yeah, and pretty much every boss after that, then it's just like it's just a massacre. You're just going around the lands between, and you're like putting everybody down really quick. I do like that with Radon entering his arena from the wrong areas. Getting into Radon's arena is super cool. I know with the first one, that Blanks run, the any percent glitchless, you actually can just jump down into the arena and do the Stake of America skip, which is pretty cool. What is it? You activate the Stake of America without having to go through Red Main, and then you just spawn there.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You basically die within the range of the stake by managing to avoid the kill planes that are in the upper part of Caelid, and that way you can just spawn right in front of the fight. Yeah.
Another one of my favorite skips is in the Halig tree. And this one, you don't even need to avoid the kill plane. You can just throw your dead body down an elevator well, and as long as it lands on the button, it just brings the elevator up. In Elphael, that one's great. And then there's a really tricky one to get down to Loretta, because you have to lure a misbegotten over to the edge, and then do a riposte at the right moment, and then you're like falling off while it happens. It's just madness.
Yeah, exactly. Because the riposte, obviously, in order to keep the animation from being interrupted, the game gives you invincibility frames, right? You cannot get hit, you cannot take damage during it. But if you do it properly and you start falling during that animation, and the animation stays active as you land, then the invincibility frames are active during the fall, and the fall damage gets prevented. That skip is quite a big of a bitch, though, because relying on enemy AI is always tricky. And so I basically have to try and bait out specific attacks out of the misbegotten first to get them on an internal cooldown, because it is impossible to get the riposte after them, right? And so I'm hoping to get like a good attack, essentially. And if I don't, well, I'm like almost 1 hour into a run, we're like 95% of the way there, and if he doesn't cooperate, the run just dies.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
How many times have you beaten Elden Ring, you think?
Well, I have over 2,500 hours at this point, so I would say quite a few times.
Oh my gosh. I was going to ask you at one point how many hours you got put in, because
It's a few.
I mean, just seeing the memorization for smaller things that I took a lot of appreciation in some of these runs was like the RNG of knowing how many mushrooms are between you and the next spot so that you can make those sleeping pots. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. And all the while that you're keeping track of your inventory like that, you're moving and managing your inventory. And maybe it's just because I've played a lot of Helldivers lately, and the button combos to call in stratagems are just muscle memory at this point, but seeing someone move through the menu as quickly as speedrunners do in Elden Ring is incredible, because I have to stop and read and think, but you guys got it all memorized, and you make it look really fast.
Yeah, menuing is a pretty big part of FromSoft speedrunning. Not always to save time, because a lot of times you can menu while sprinting in the latter games, not in Dark Souls 1, for example. But the big part of why having menuing optimized and memorized is that then you can use your brain power on something else, right? When it becomes muscle memory, you can think about the patterns, you can think about doing other stuff. Or if you're streaming, you can interact with chat much easier. If you have to focus on the menuing, you might be way more likely to make small mistakes elsewhere.
Yep, and I think that's the difference between about 163 hours over here and 2,000 over there.
One other moment I wanted to call out in your world record run. You don't kill Gideon. Thanks. It's surprising that you mentioned Gideon is one of the more troublesome bosses, because most people, he's kind of a jokish boss, but for a speedrun, he becomes a little bit kind of more random. Is that kind of why he's unpredictable?
Yeah, so in any percent glitchless, like if you do everything correctly, you should be able to get the fight done the same way every time, right? But it's quite tricky on execution. And the reason you want to do that tight execution is because it's an NPC fight. So he will stall, he will drink his Estus, he will keep on rolling away. Obviously in 1.06, light roll got buffed. And with that also all the NPCs, because all the NPCs light roll. So they get more distance. It is much more difficult to actually catch up to them and roll catch them. So Gideon can be quite a bit of a menace. And in this All Remembrances run, he would get pizza swapped and die really quickly. That wouldn't be a problem, but he talks, obviously. He talks a lot. And it is faster to go around and do the skip over the branch than it is to go ahead and kill him and wait for his dialogue.
Yeah, I knew that with the Hand of Melania there was skips to like extend your distance, but I didn't know that with Loretta's Sickle you could do like vertical movement skips like that. Is there other... So yeah, for the Gideon skip you use Loretta's Sickle, you go around the outside of that room. Is there other vertical skips you can do with Loretta's Sickle, or is it kind of for that one spot?
It's basically, I think there's like one other place around Caria Manor where you can use Loretta's Sickle, but it's not really speedrun relevant. So honestly, this is like the main use case. You can do that jump without Loretta's Sickle as well, but it's a little bit slower because you have to do an extra jump. It's another thing that actually got patched, like it's not possible on current patch, but on that older patch, that branch on the side of the Erdtree Sanctuary, as it's called, that was available.
I'm very impressed. This is some of my favorite stuff to watch. I love watching speedruns because it's just seeing a game you love broken down so fast and see things you didn't know were possible. Are there any cool glitches in the game that just don't have a use in the speedruns?
I mean, there's cool applications of, for example, the pizza swap, but by using different items in your inventory that do not necessarily have a use in speedruns. There's one skip that we didn't mention in Fire Missoula where you can skip from basically around Godskin Duo all the way to the Great Bridge by kind of flying over the gap that uses the Devour Scepter and the Hand of Malenia. Yeah. So that is, for example, also something that can be done. And similar interactions can be achieved by using different weapons as well. So there's stuff that can be done in PvP. Obviously, the PvP community is kind of split on that because you don't really want to be exploiting glitches when you're doing PvP. But yeah, there are some things in the game that do not necessarily see use in speedruns.
Isn't there one called like Bolo Swap where you can make any weapon have any weapon skill?
Yeah, that one got patched out, but that was the thing as well. Yeah, you would use a bolus, and then during that animation, it was possible to like swap out weapons and stuff. Very similar to Pizza Swap in that regard, but FromSoft got rid of that one.
When you play Shadow of the Erdtree, are you going to be doing any of these movement texts the first time, or do you kind of just play the first time?
Yeah, the first time I'm just going to enjoy it and I'm going to play it normally. I will tell you that as a speedrunner over the years, sometimes I've done casual playthroughs of games and it was difficult not to like try and break things, right? Like you talked about abusing geometry. Like I see, okay, this looks like a little bit suspicious. Like let me try and jump into this corner. And I've definitely tried to get out of bounds in games, but I think for Elden Ring, for Shadow of the Erdtree, we've been waiting so long. I think I will savor it. I will try to enjoy it, and the breaking will come after that.
Yeah, we had Spike Vagina on an episode talking about Final Fantasy X, a game he's beaten so many times, and he knew nothing about the story. I'm like, did you pay attention even once? And yeah, it's interesting. When you get that speedrunning mentality, you kind of just want to bake it into everything you're doing. My first time playing through Jedi Survivor, I was like, oh, this is broken. This geometry is broken. This platforming is wonky. And I was able to do a pretty big sequence break just from hitting my head for like 30 seconds. And I could have been just playing the game and enjoying it, but also there's something cool about when you like can see behind the curtain and you kind of want to push things a little further. You also speedrun The Last of Us, right?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up at the end because it is well known that I try to bring up The Last of Us as often as I can on any of the podcasts that we do.
Have you watched a speedrun of that?
No, I didn't know that you did one. And that's got to be almost I imagine, a frustrating speedrun because of the cutscenes. But you can skip the majority of them, can't you?
Well, it depends. The in-game ones usually are unskippable. All the CGI ones were skippable. For a speedrun like that, that's as lore heavy and cutscene heavy, you really have to enjoy playing Last of Us to be able to do it. And so for a while, I was definitely there, and Last of Us is absolutely one of my favorite games, but would I want to like do the speedrun regularly again? No, exactly for the reason that you mentioned, like all the cutscenes, all the downtime. I got very spoiled by Elden Ring and other FromSoft games because their speedruns are usually like you start a run, right? You skip the first cutscene and you go all the way until the credits. There's nothing where you have to wait. In Last of Us, that's different. There's the pacing is very, very different. So the run is cool. I wouldn't mind showcasing it at a marathon again, even though I haven't done it in a long time. But running it regularly, no.
Yeah, I don't do any speed running, but I imagine if I was going to, I would probably pick a game like The Last of Us just because it's the game that, like you said, you have to pick a game you enjoy. And that's a game that I've beaten at this point 5 or 6 times, 7 maybe. And so I've gotten all the lore and the content out of it that I can get. So maybe taking my game to the next level and trying some cool shit with that would be cool. But what was your time on it? Did you do glitchless, or is that even a category for that game?
Yeah, glitchless is definitely a category. I did any percent. The difference there actually wasn't that big. So I think my time was like 2 hours, 34 minutes. And I believe glitchless was like 2:45, right? So not that big of a difference. And the reason I ran any percent is exactly because of that, because there was some cool speedrunning tech that you could do that would skip a couple of sections. There's like a huge skip in Pittsburgh, for example. And it was a lot of fun to try and learn that tech. But doing glitchless, like, you're not going to miss out on that much stuff, actually.
That's crazy, too, because I just beat that game on my most recent playthrough about a month or 2 ago, and I think I clocked in at like 21, 22 hours. So the fact that you did it in 2 that's pretty crazy.
You were smelling the roses, though.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I just love that game. But the I haven't looked up the Pittsburgh skip, but I've heard about it. I think Brad told me about it a couple weeks ago. Maybe we were talking about something.
Yeah. I just try and skip Pittsburgh any chance I get.
Yeah, I try to skip it in real life, and I'm going to try and skip it in the game.
So when you're a big From Software guy, are you really into like the lore of Elden Ring as well and the story? Or are you mostly there for the gameplay?
Yeah, for Elden Ring, it's mostly the gameplay for me, actually. Like, I'm a huge fan of Dark Souls 1 lore. I really, really like it. Elden Ring, in particular, to me, seems a little bit too complex, too ephemeral, too many ephemeral concepts, too many characters. It just didn't really click with me the same way, right? So I do enjoy the setting. I enjoy the way the game looks. I enjoy the way the characters are designed. But I don't really have to, like, dive super deep into the lore.
Do you get into any like the speculation stuff for Shadow of the Erdtree? Have you watched any of the videos, or do you have any specific thoughts about what you think, not necessarily lore wise, but what you think might be happening?
Well, I guess I haven't really thought about it in that way. I'm mostly concerned or interested about, how big the region that we're going to have available is going to be. How is the power scaling going to work? What exactly are going to be the new weapon types? What new bosses are we getting? Are there going to be repeat bosses, right, from the base game? Or are we getting like upgraded versions of Erdtree avatars or something like that? Yeah. How many legacy dungeons are there going to be? How many caves and grottos and everything are there going to be? So I'm more interested really in the gameplay aspects, but it's fun to speculate on a little bit of the lore as well, right? Like I thought there was a huge theory when it came to whether it's like in the past time or in the future where the DLC is going to take place, and then Miyazaki was like, no, it's taking place like at the same time as the main game. So like engaging in that speculation was fun, but I'm also glad when we basically get some kind of a final info that basically seals the deal.
Yeah, there's part of me that wishes I could not watch the trailer, but I also, because I'm going to love it. I try and avoid movie trailers, because I know like if it's from a filmmaker, I appreciate it. I'm going to just go have a great time anyways, and being surprised is a good thing. Do you have any upcoming events that you wanted to mention, or you got any speedrunning things going on?
Yeah, well, there was an event in Sweden that I mentioned. That was ESA Winter, where I performed an Elden Ring run for charity. There's going to be another event of, it's going to be ESA Summer, so basically the same event where I hope to be playing some more Elden Ring as well. 2-player 1 controller, actually.
Whoa.
So that could be.
Are you D-pad or button the other side?
Yeah, I'm on the left side. Yeah, D-pad. That was my. No, actually, sorry. No, I'm on the other side. Yeah, so D-pad was my partner, and I was the one rolling and attacking mostly.
That's madness. You got to really be synced in with somebody.
Yeah, and that's been the super fun part about it, right? That the player that I'm doing 2-player 1 controller with, like, we didn't really even have to practice that much because we individually understood the bosses well enough to the point that we did just a couple of tries and then we kind of synced together really well. So I'm hoping that's going to be there. No promises because obviously it needs to be accepted first, but I'll try to submit that. And other than that, there's going to be some exciting months ahead before the DLC release because there's going to be a season of Bingo Brawlers, which is competition in Elden Ring Bingo. That I'm going to be part of. Season 2 I managed to win, so Season 3 is going to be quite exciting. I'll try to obviously go back to back. And then there's going to be also another league right before the DLC called Zero Hit League. I'm not directly participating in that, but let's say I have a horse in the running and I might be doing some commentary as well on that. So there's been it's going to be quite lively. Not all of it speedrunning, but all of it speed related.
Can you explain briefly about Bingo Brawlers? I'm not familiar.
Yeah, of course. So basically, what you end up with is a 5x5 grid of objectives, random objectives that you have to complete. Let's say, kill a remembrance boss with daggers, claws, or fists only, right? Like that could be a potential square. And when you do that within the game, you can claim that square. And as you do, your opponent cannot claim that square anymore.
That's cool.
And the goal is to get a line of 5, right? Whether that's a row, whether that's a column, or whether that's a diagonal. And if no lines are possible, then whoever has more squares wins. So it's like the only way that you can, at least that I know of, that you can compete with someone in Elden Ring and your gameplay directly influences their gameplay and vice versa, right? Because when you get a square, they cannot get it anymore. So if 2 players were working towards the same square, but you get it first, that's a huge thing. And you're directly like playing off of the information that you see on the board when people mark squares or don't mark squares and stuff like that. So it's very exciting. And if you're a fan of Elden Ring, I can only recommend checking it out.
When is that? Because I would definitely like to check that out.
Yeah, so that will start on the 6th of April as when the new season starts. And it's going to be a new format. It's not going to be the same exact way as it was in Season 2. It's going to be actually 2 versus 2 bingo.
Is that streaming on Twitch then?
That's correct, yeah. I think all the info you're going to be able to find on bingobrawlers.com.
Sweet. I'm going to check that out.
What's super great about runs like that is it's on-the-fly routing. So it's really testing someone's complete mastery of the game, not just A, B, C. It's also like D, Q, R. Oh, shit, someone's already halfway to Rykard. I'm going to go to Ronalva. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen some of those like bingos before on different games, and it's super exciting because they're different spots, and it's like about fucking the other person up as much as working on it yourself. Super cool. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, you basically like got it spot on. It to me, it's like the highest expression of skill right now because it requires you to be fast, obviously. It requires you to have mastery of multiple weapons. You cannot just script a fight because every time you're going to have different stats, you're going to have different weapon that you're going to be using against the boss. And it also involves a lot of mind games and reading your opponent, right? Because you cannot see what your opponent is doing. The only thing that you can see is the board.
Oh, you can't see what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot see what they're doing. So the only information you get is what is on the board or what isn't on the board, right? And then if you see them mark a square, you can think, okay, that took them the last 4 minutes to complete. So I know they weren't working on this. So maybe when I was working on a square A and I know that they weren't working on it, I can hold off on that square right now and do something else in the meantime. And that way, you're not only getting time advantage, but information advantage as well, because you're not showing your opponent what you were doing. So a lot of mind games, a lot of execution, a lot of routing on the fly, and it's just a lot of fun. So I'm glad that I was able to tell you about this event to you guys, and hopefully you check it out.
Yeah, everyone should definitely check that out. Before we let you go, is there any other games you're playing right now that you're excited about outside Elden Ring?
Well, we talked briefly at the start. I have Balatro on my Switch, so I'm ready to try and jump into it. Other than that, not really. I mean, I recently played Adventures of Cookie and Cream, if you guys know what that is. That's an old From Software game.
No way.
No, never heard of it.
Yeah, that is like an old From Software game from 2001.
Cookie and Cream.
And it's... Yeah, Adventures of Cookie and Cream. And the reason it's interesting is because it is designed for 2-player 1 controller, right? You have 2 characters, and one of them is controlled with the left side of the controller and the other one with the right side. So that's something that we did recently with my co-op partner. And Yeah, other than that, not really. There isn't that much time to be playing anything else besides Elden Ring.
I agree. Thank you so much for joining us today, Catalystz. I know we've been trying to make this happen. I messaged you first a long time ago, and then life happened, and we got busy. I'm so happy we were able to talk today about this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun. I love sharing my experiences and, dare I say, expertise. So I'm super happy that you guys appreciated this, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
I mean, what you do reminds me of Carl Sagan, the actual scientist, not the speedrunner of Mario. Maybe him as well, but he's like having these great scientific theories. They're great, but if people can't understand what's happening, it doesn't really. I mean, it's important that everybody can take a part in the greatness that is speedrunning, and the fact that you make these videos that can make them relatable and understandable to people. Because otherwise, if you try without videos like your own, I wind up on forums and message boards, and I'm reading all of these different this jargon that I might not be as familiar with. So it's really great just seeing a line that shows 6 frames versus 7 frames versus 8 frames and nice camera work. Like I wish every video game had speedrun videos made by you.
Thank you. That is honestly like one of the nicest compliments I've heard. So thank you very much.
And you're cool.
No, you guys.
If any of our listeners wanted to check out your stuff, where could they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on both Twitch and YouTube at Catalystz, on Twitter at Catalystz_, same with Instagram, and yeah, I stream on Twitch 3 times a week, and try to make as many videos as possible on YouTube, but they take a bit of time. So, but I'm full time at this point, so hopefully more of them are coming.
Well, thanks again so much for your time. And our Elden Ring coverage will be continuing here at Elden Dogs. We are going to be diving deep into spirit ashes, into weapons, into armor. We're going to be leaving no stone unturned until we get to Shadow of the Erd Tree. Now, if you're interested in getting more coverage, more episodes about Elden Ring, make sure to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/hairofthedogcast. There is already a huge backlog of episodes that are not on the main feed. Those come out every 2 weeks, whereas on the main feed, you get them about once a month. So if you're interested in learning as much as you can before Shadow of the Erd Tree, make sure to check out patreon.com/hairofthedogcast. There's a free trial. Give it a try for a week if you're interested. And we want to do a special thanks to our executive producers, Rykard Kristinik, Malekith the Black Blade, Blackguard Big Brian Ward, Jordan Hoslow, Sorceress of Blood, Festering Fingerprint Phil Wright, Iron Fist Phil Just Phil, Knights Cavalry Cole Delgardno, Bell Bearing Hunter Bryant Ross, and Crucible Knight Kelly Gutowski. We appreciate your support. And we're here, the Dogcast. Check out all of our social medias. Let us know what you think at Hair the Dogcast, at Hot Dogcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. We're on all of them. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.